Next up, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce to you the next speaker of the day, Professor Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev. Professor Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev, who is an architect, independent researcher, conservation consultant, and an academic. She's an alumnus of School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and has completed her PhD from University of London. In the 3 decades of teaching and practice, she has held senior leadership positions in reputed universities across India and UK. She is an expert on and a published scholar on traditional knowledge systems, modern teas, and material culture of India. Among others, her scholarship on Jaipur and contribution to Jal Mahal is well known. Dr. Vibhuti is the Dean of Architecture and Design and Director of Gittim School of Architecture, Visakhapatnam. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together as we welcome Dr. Vibhuti on stage.
Thank you. I'm going to do a very different thing. Thank you, Anand, for inviting me again. The first half of the day is about architecture. The second half is about interior. Of course, it's also about awards. But I'm going to try and mess the two categories, and let me see if I succeed. I'm going to talk about how architecture actually produces the outdoors. And then I'm going to talk about, later on in the day, how the outdoors is always inside. And what then happens to slide changes here. So the first slide is, of course, a blurb that I've put on a Nayak Nayika painting. It reminds me of COVID, where Krishna is telling Radha to stay indoors. It's dangerous outside. There are lots of outdoor experiences that we've seen, especially during festivals, where lots of us will come out, maybe decreasingly so, but you will remember marriage processions like these during Gangaur and Tej in Jaipur, where people would climb on the chhajas, you can see people on the terraces, wanting to catch a glimpse of the Devi. This is a much older photograph of the same scene. It's not a festival, but it's a royal procession, the same city. Sort of late 19th century photograph. And you can see how people are outside. People throng the streets. People want to get outside, climb the chhajas, climb the roof, see what's happening outside. And there are scenarios where you've seen that there are people who will cramp themselves into a tight space, wanting to take a glimpse of this. Here it's a darshan. Is this created without architecture? Is the coming together of people outside of buildings created by architecture, or is it something else? And some of you who come from the north would, have experienced this even today during Makar Sankranti, how kite flying is a big event and children, adults would climb from terrace to reach out to the fallen kite. And in this excitement, one would forget the boundaries of houses, and there's another layer of living that is happening, not on the ground, but on the roof. Is this because of architecture? This is a lovely scene of a painting of again, 18th century painting of a roof. And it has a pavilion on the roof, a river flowing in the background with lovely trees. There is a pop-up pavilion that has come on the roof to for the Nayak and Nayika, or the Maharaja and the Princess, or having an evening out or evening outside. This also makes us think, are we an indoor culture? Are we supposed to stay indoors? Again, this is a scene from, is a painting where Krishna comes back and visits his home and his 116 wives and his mother and Rukmini as well. And the point about showing this is, look at the transition from the outside to indoors. It actually doesn't happen indoors. It's all outside. You go from the public space, from the gateway, to a veranda, to an interior veranda. In fact, you can see the bedroom on the top left, which is the most interior space. And what is being used is outside. It's that very vibrant, dynamic space between complete outdoors and complete interiors. That is the most usable, that is the most exciting dynamic space. This is a fresco from a niche in a Haveli in Jaipur, and it shows the various levels of outdoor living. And you can see the gardens, which have, of course, got corroded or damaged, but you can see the fountains in the garden and the veranda, and then another veranda and a roof, and finally on the topmost roof, and the pavilion on the roof. And many of these things are pop-up, in the sense that the chajjas and the chicks and the pavilions will come up when required, and they recede when it's too cold. So in a way, the building surface is not static. It's breathing, it's extending, it's withdrawing, it's elaborating, it's condensing, it's dynamic. This is a picture of from City Palace, Jaipur, and this is what most of the buildings will look like today. From the outside. This is, of course, again, 18th century, and also evolving. You can see the air conditioners, you can see the chicks being used, and the courtyard quite barren. And most heritage buildings we see today are the skeletons of the past. And it is the paintings that tell us sometimes how these buildings would have been used and lived. This is what the building may have looked like. This is a different building, but very similar in its period, 18th century building. And you see on the ground floor, the chicks, the awnings coming out, the windows are covered, there are floor coverings. On the first floor as well, you can see the jarokas being used, and the awning and the chajja, which is, of course, textile, it's extended to shade the building. And on the topmost terrace, and it's a full moon night, everybody is wearing white, light colors. It's a bit like Sharad Purnima, where you wear white and light colors. It's the brightest moon of the year. And you can see the king on the roof enjoying, as he would, music, women, but you see how in the past buildings wore clothes, and they extended themselves and they sheltered them, and there were floor coverings and wall coverings and chajjas, and this whole layer of architectural textiles has almost vanished. And there was a great production of these architectural textiles in terms of carpets, in terms of chicks, in terms of awnings, in terms of pavilions, foldable pavilions as well. And this is what you can see. And this is not very old. It's just 200, 300 years old. It's not something that I'm talking about Harappan civilization. This is still, there are still people who can make these things. This is an early 20th century painting, and you can see the sort of the European style coming in. But this is a painting that is about the whole town waiting for the arrival of Krishna back into the town. And even here, and this is not very old, and even here you can see how the buildings have extended themselves into the outdoors. It's sort of, and the beautiful sunshades, which were sometimes had, and you can see some of these in the museums. You get these sunshades that have zardozi on top. So when the sun shines on it, it sort of glistens. And then you've got these roll-up chicks, and so much of the transition between what is outside and what is inside is being used. This is an old photograph of Galta, and you can see how there are vendors on the outside of the building. There are people waiting. There is life outside. And then you see, as soon as the restoration team kicks in, we want it very clean. We want to push people out from outside the buildings to keep it clean. And it is a paradox, isn't it, that human beings and human use is a threat to monuments. How can it be? And so you see, you're not allowed to. Of course, I totally agree with the A-grade monuments, which are iconic. But there are a lot of B-grade monuments that can still be used, and you see a lot of that in Europe. That old monuments being converted into banks, to schools, to art galleries, to cafes. And so cleaning and sanitizing of buildings, of having strict boundaries of what is inside and what is outside, and then having a clinical divide is somehow been the practice for some time. Okay, this is my last slide. It's a stock photo, but which also goes to show that this is still in demand. But so much of vibrancy of our cities, of our culture, of our daily life can happen outside, and I think architecture ought to facilitate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vibhuti. Can we hear a round of applause for her once again?